Very often when we look at historical small arms, we don't really see the kinds of small arms that failed and that didn't do a good job so along the line, that really jammed up and didn't work in combat. The Reising submachine gun is one of these. So today we're going to be looking at this peculiar submachine gun and see some of the intricacies of, why it didn't work out so well and why the Marine Corps really didn't like it during World War II. It also had some advantages, which we'll get to in a bit. The Reising was a 45 ACP submachine gun. It has a selector switch located on the right side of the gun. Describing some of the features of the Reising include a finned compensator at the very front of the muzzle. Then there were fins on the top of the barrel, very similar to fins from the 1928 Thompson that we've seen earlier on TFB TV. The rear sight was a very simple affair and was graduated for a number of distances on top. Then the selector goes from safe to single and then to full auto. There are a number of complaints from vets who were saying that the safety was very difficult to know exactly what position it was on while in the hours of darkness. So the Reising was invented by Eugene Reising in 1938. It was picked up by Harrington and Richardson in the early parts of World War II. And the Marine Corps took a look at it and they said, well, this thing is 25% the total cost of a Thompson, and being typical Marine Corps Army rivalry going on, we can't afford a Thompson as it is, so let's just buy a whole bunch of them. And the Marine Corps did. The Marine Corps bought at least 33,000 of the M55 collapsible stock versions and much more of the other M50, the full stock versions. At first glance, the Reising did have a couple of advantages over the Thompson. It was closed bolt, so it shot a little bit more accurately. It had a collapse in stock. It was also 25% cheaper than a stock Thompson at the time. But because of the situations at the time, and the Marine Corps wanted to really buy the gun outright and not go through the required product testing and design testing that really every firearm should have before it's adopted by the military, the Marine Corps bought tons of them, sent them into combat on Guadalcanal. Oftentimes, for the Marines who received them, shooting them for the first time was in combat, not on a range. And they found out there were tons of problems with these things. First of all, the finish rusted up like no other. It was extremely complicated with the safety, with the magazine release. It had a charging handle for the bolt that was located underneath the firearm that you had to stick your finger up in to charge. It could only hold 15 or 20 round magazines because the design of the magazine didn't allow it to hold more than that, whereas with the Thompson you were looking at 30 rounds or even 50 rounds with some of the drums. It also had a lot of issues with fitting. During production of the Reising, oftentimes workers hand-fitted parts together. This doesn't often work very well when you're having a problem with interchangeable parts and you need guys to be able to swap broken parts for fixed parts. So anyways, we have got accounts from World War II of Marines literally just taking entire barrels full of Reisings, arriving to them and dumping them into rivers rather than take them into combat. I mean, this is pretty bad if you're dumping your weapon system into a river and would rather take anything else than that weapon system. Anyways, to get into the details of the weapon, there were three versions. There is the M50 with a short barrel that ended at the forend, had a very large compensator. There is the M55, which had a wire folding stock that looked pretty uncomfortable to use, but at least it snapped back into place on the left. Then there's also the M60, which was a way to skirt around NFA, SBR, and full auto requirements for law enforcement usage because it had a longer barrel and it was only offered in semi-automatic. In total, around 125,000 Reisings were made of all three models. Obviously, earlier we mentioned during World War II, the Reisings weren't very favored at all by the Marine Corps. However, there were a number of other entities that did adopt and use the Reising. There were a number of law enforcement entities in the United States that adopted the Reising because it was a cheaper pistol caliber carbine that they could carry with them, and it offered a little more than their revolvers that they would have had at the time as well. Outside of the United States, a number of countries that adopted the Reising are Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Costa Rica, Finland, Mexico, New Zealand, the Soviet Union from Lend-Lease, the Philippines, the United Kingdom, Uruguay, and Venezuela. Not all of these were in very high volume purchases, but there's a decent amount that was bought by a number of these. Today, the Reising is really a collector item among various NFA collectors for the M50 and the M55 model. And in addition, the magazines are one of the hardest things for collectors to get because I had a proprietary magazine that costs about $100 or more today. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I really appreciate the viewership on this channel. I'd really like to thank the National Firearms Center as a part of the Royal Armories in Leeds for allowing me to film all 3 variants of the Reising that they had on hand. I'd also like to thank the private collector who so generously offered up his Model M50 Reising for me to shoot at a private range. But most of all, I would really like to thank Ventura Munitions for really providing us the support that we need to continue this channel and try to get some good high quality footage of these guns out there for you. Stay safe out there, TFB TV.